That trailer and those animals are functionally part of our community, and you will move them off our viewshed by Friday, or we will have you removed." That was Dana Pruitt, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, standing at the end of my driveway in white sneakers and a blazer, the color of a traffic cone, reading off a clipboard about land her association had never owned, never surveyed. The viewshed, she meant, was my hay meadow. The animals were 9 head of cattle and 2 horses that had grazed that meadow since before her subdivision existed. And the trailer was my late wife's tack room, the one Carol painted barn red the summer before she got sick. What Dana did not know, standing there jabbing her pen at my fence, was that I had spent 31 years as a county surveyor, that I had personally walked and recorded the boundary of every parcel in that valley, and that the strip of gravel her police cruisers would soon be parking on did not belong to the town the way everyone assumed it did. She thought she was looking at a stubborn old rancher. She was looking at the man who drew the map. So, let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If a woman in a cone-colored blazer told you the cattle your wife loved were a code violation, and then sent armed deputies to your gate to prove it, what would you have done? Would you have argued? Would you have moved them? Or would you have gone quiet and gone to the records room and started reading? My name is Ray Holloway. I am 63 years old. For 31 years I worked as a licensed land surveyor for Garnet County, and for the last 9 of those years I ran the survey division before I retired. I own 140 acres at the mouth of Cedar Ridge Canyon, a working cattle operation my father started in 1958 and I took over in 1990. The deed is recorded, the brand is registered. The water right predates statehood, and every fence line on that property was set by a survey I signed with my own hand. A surveyor learns something most people never have to. He learns that the ground does not care what you believe about it. You can be certain you own a thing right up until the steel chain, the recorded plat, tell you that you do not, and the plat does not raise its voice, and it does not change its mind. I spent 3 decades standing between angry neighbors at the property line, and the lesson came back to me 1,000 times. The man who is measured and recorded, calm, because he has nothing left to prove. The man who is shouting because he never checked. I had watched it across the counter so many times that I knew, the first morning Dana Pruitt raised her pen at me, which one of us she was. My father bought the canyon ground in '58 with money he made hauling timber, and he ran it 40 years on a handshake economy that does not exist anymore. He taught me to set a corner pin and pour the concrete around it so it would still be there in 100 years. There is a brass cap on the northeast corner of my property that he set in 1961, and I have stood over it more times than I can count, and it has never once moved. People build their lives on things they assume will hold. A surveyor builds his on things he has confirmed will. Carol and I bought my father out together in 1990, the year we married. She came from a family of bookkeepers, and she ran our operation like a ledger. Every receipt kept, every gate repair dated, every vet bill filed. She was the one who labeled the folders, who taught me that a careful man writes everything down and dates it, who told me more than once that memory is a liar and paper is not. When she got sick the last spring, she spent an afternoon at the kitchen table going through 4 years of folders with me, making sure I knew where everything was. And the last real thing she made me promise was that I would keep doing it her way after she was gone. So I have. I have a manila folder for every year. I have a legal pad on the kitchen table where the day's events get written down before bed. I have 2 cameras on the barn that save to a drive in the house and a drive in the shop. People around the valley thought that Habit was a little paranoid for a man with no enemies. Carol would have called it tidy. It turned out to be the thing that saved the wrench. I also have a son. Cole is 17, a junior at the county high school, and he has lived with me alone since his mother died. He is quiet, the way she was quiet, watchful. The kind of boy who hears a thing and files it without saying much, and then surprises you a week later with how much he understood. He does his chores before school and his homework after. And on Sundays, he still sets 2 extra plates out of habit before he remembers and puts one back. He was the one who first told me to start saving the letters. He came in from the mailbox one afternoon with the second notice in his hand, read it standing in the doorway, and said, "You should keep these somewhere, Dad. All of them, in order." I told him his mother would have said the same thing. He almost smiled. The letters began the spring. The Cedar Ridge subdivision filled in. For 40 years, the land above my canyon was open range and a few summer cabins. Then, a developer named Marcus Pruitt bought 300 acres on the bench above me, cut roads, and built 90 houses with a gate and a sign and a homeowners association to run it. Marcus Pruitt was Dana's husband. I did not know that yet. I just knew the cabins had become a town, and the town had opinions about my cows. The first letter came on a Tuesday in April. It was printed on Cedar Ridge HOA letterhead, the kind with an embossed pine tree in the corner that somebody had paid a designer for, and it informed me that my property was being brought into compliance with community aesthetic standards, and that I would be assessed fines until the animals were removed. I read it standing at the mailbox. Then I read it again at the kitchen table. Then I drove up to the gate at the top of the bench, and a woman in a golf cart rolled down to meet me before I could so much as get out of the truck. And that was the first time I heard Dana Pruitt say the word that became the spine of this whole story. She was maybe 50, trim, with a sharp blonde bob and sunglasses pushed up on the crown of her head, even though it was overcast. She had on a linen blazer and white sneakers that had never touched a working surface in their life, and she carried the clipboard against her chest like a badge. She did not introduce herself as a person. "I'm Dana Pruitt, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association," she said. "This is functionally our jurisdiction. Now, the valley reads as one community. We just need everyone pulling in the same direction." I told her my land was not in her association, had never been platted into it, and that her board had no authority over a county-zoned agricultural parcel. I was polite. I had been polite to 1,000 angry property owners across the surveyor's counter, and I had learned that the calm man wins the long game and the loud man writes the other side's evidence for them. I told her the cattle had been on that meadow longer than her subdivision had existed, and that they would stay. She smiled at me, the way you smile at a child who does not understand the rules yet. "We'll see," she said. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." She turned the golf cart around in the road and drove back up the hill, and I watched her go, and then I drove home, and I started a new manila folder, and on the tab I wrote the year, and inside it I put the letter, and on the legal pad I wrote the date, the time, and the word she used. Functionally. Incident 1. Cole asked me at dinner what the lady wanted. I told him she wanted the cows gone. He asked if they could do that. I told him no. He asked how I knew, and he asked it the way she had asked it. Like there was a real possibility the answer was yes, and I understood then that even my own son had grown up in a world where the people with the letterhead usually won. So, I told him something his mother used to say, that the difference between a man who is sure and a man who is right is a recorded document, and that I happened to have both. He wrote it down on a yellow sticky note and stuck it on the fridge. It is still there. The glue gave out a year ago, and I taped it back up. The second letter came 3 weeks later, and this one had a number on it. $200, assessed weekly, retroactive to the first notice. There was a line at the bottom about the matter being referred to collections if it went unresolved. I did not pay it. I filed it. By June, there were 5 letters in the folder, and the fines on paper had reached $2,000. None of it collected, all of it filed. I want you to understand that I never once wrote back. Carol taught me that an angry reply is a gift to the other side, a thing that can wave around in front of a judge and say, "Look how unreasonable this man is." A filed copy with a date is the opposite. It is a thing you keep in your pocket and never wave around until the one moment it decides everything. So I kept mine in my pocket, and I went on cutting hay, and I let the folder get thick. What I started doing that summer, quietly, was reading. Not the HOA letters. The county records. I still had my access credentials from 31 years of work. And more than that, I had the maps in my own memory, because a man who draws a valley for 3 decades carries it around in his head whether he wants to or not. And here's the thing that had been bothering me since the day Dana Pruitt said the word jurisdiction. I had surveyed the road that led up to her subdivision. I had surveyed it in 1996, when the county was deciding whether to take it over for maintenance, and I remembered something about how that deal had ended that nobody in Cedar Ridge seemed to know. I spent 4 evenings at the county building that July after hours, with the assessor's plat books open on the long table where I used to work. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same as they always had. The smell of old paper and toner was the same. I traced the road up from the highway parcel by parcel, the way I would have for a title search, and I found what I half remembered. The road up to the bench, the one the developer used, the one the sheriff's substation sat beside, ran across a corner of ground that had never been formally deeded to anyone. It was a remnant parcel, a sliver. When the original Cedar Ridge Ranch was subdivided back in the 1940s, the surveyor of the day had closed his boundaries in a way that left a narrow wedge of ground along the road belonging to no described lot. It happened more than people think in the old surveys. A described tract would call for a line to a creek or a road, and the geometry would not quite close, and a thin remnant would be orphaned. Through 40 years of paperwork, tax sales, and county reorganizations, this one had simply fallen through every crack. The county thought the developer owned it. The tax rolls listed the owner as unknown, and nobody had paid taxes on it since the Eisenhower administration. I knew, because I had flagged exactly this in a memo in 1996 when the county took over the road, that the remnant was never part of the dedication. I had written it up, recommended the county acquire it to clean up the title. And the recommendation had gone in a drawer because cleaning up a 2-acre sliver nobody was fighting over was nobody's priority. It had sat there unclaimed for 60 years, and under the county's own ordinance, unowned remnant ground with delinquent taxes was open for purchase by any qualified party who filed for it and paid the arrears. I sat in that empty office with the plat book open, and I understood that the road every Cedar Ridge homeowner drove every day, and the gravel lot where the sheriff parked the cruisers, sat on ground that I could legally buy. I filed that fact away too. I did not act on it yet. I just knew it was there, the way you know where a load-bearing wall is in your own house. The escalation that summer climbed like a staircase, and I counted every step. In July, a man in a reflective vest showed up at my fence with a clipboard and announced he was conducting a compliance inspection on behalf of the association. He was a soft, sweating man in his 40s with a lanyard he had clearly bought himself, and he stood on the county road taking photographs of my barn over the fence with the confidence of a man who believed the vest gave him a right to be there. "You'll need to step back from the structures while I document the violations," he told me, not looking up from his camera. I asked to see his county code enforcement credential. He told me he was contracted by the association. I asked him again, slower, whether he had any badge or county identification authorizing an inspection of private agricultural property. He did not. He had a vest and a clipboard and a printout of my address. I told him he was standing on a county road and could photograph all he liked from there, but that the moment he crossed my fence, he was trespassing, and the 2 cameras on my barn were already recording him. He looked up at the cameras. He took a few more pictures to save face, and then he got in his car and left. That night I downloaded the footage of him photographing my barn, and I filed it alongside my own note of his visit, and I labeled it Incident 8. In August, the harassment reached my customers. I sell hay and quarter beef to half the valley, and that side of the operation runs on 30 years of trust and word of mouth. A rancher named Tom Squires, a man I have sold winter hay to since before Cole was born, called me one evening, and his voice was tight in a way I had never heard from him. "Ray," he said, "I got a letter today. On that fancy HOA paper." He read me part of it over the phone. It said that if he continued purchasing from a non-compliant agricultural operation under association review, he could be reported to county code for participating in an unlicensed agricultural exchange, and that his own property might be examined for related violations. "Now I know that's horse manure," Tom said. "But Ray, my wife read it first, and she's worried. Can they do that? Can they come after me for buying your hay?" I told him no. I told him there was no such thing as an unlicensed agricultural exchange, and no authority on earth that let a homeowners association regulate who he bought feed from. I told him to send me the letter, the original, and to write down the date he received it. He did. It went in the folder. Incident 11. I sat with the phone in my hand a long time after that call, though, because they had crossed from harassing me into frightening a 68-year-old man's wife over a load of hay. And that told me this was not about aesthetics. That was the night Cole looked at me across the table and asked the question that changed how I understood all of it. "Dad," he said, "why does she care so much about our cows? It doesn't even make sense. Nobody cares this much about cows." And he was right. It did not make sense. So I went looking for the thing that would make it make sense. It took me 2 weeks at the county building and one quiet conversation with a woman named Brenda in the assessor's office, who I had worked beside for 20 years and trusted completely. The answer was development. Marcus Pruitt had filed preliminary plans for a second phase of Cedar Ridge, 200 more lots on the slope below the existing subdivision, and Brenda pulled the file and turned the marketing renderings around on the counter so I could see them. They showed an unbroken alpine meadow rolling down to a tree line, green and empty and perfect, with luxury homes arranged around the view. I knew that meadow. It was mine. It was the meadow my cattle were standing in. In the rendering, the cattle were gone, the red trailer was gone, the working ranch was gone, and in its place was a view to be sold 200 times over. My 140 acres was not a code problem. It was the centerpiece of a sales brochure, and I was standing in the middle of it with my cows. The fines, the inspector, the letters to my customers, none of it was about livestock within view of association homes. It was about making the old widower rancher tired enough, frightened enough, and broke enough to sell cheap before Phase 2 went to the county for approval. Dana Pruitt was not policing a viewshed. She was clearing inventory for her husband. I drove home that night and I sat in the truck in my own driveway for a long while, the engine ticking as it cooled, looking at the dark shape of the barn and the red trailer beside it. Then I went inside and I told Cole I understood now, and he asked what we were going to do, and I told him we were going to do exactly what we had been doing. We were going to write it down. I also made one phone call that week, though. A call I had been holding in reserve since those 4 evenings in the records room. I called a man named Pete Vance, a retired surveyor, who had trained under me years before, and now did private boundary work. And I asked him to pull the chain of title on a certain remnant parcel up by the bench. I did not tell him why. I just wanted it clean, done by someone whose name was not mine, recorded properly, witnessed. In September, the staircase got steeper. Dana Pruitt held an association meeting in the clubhouse on the bench, and a neighbor named Lottie who attended told me afterward what she said. Standing in my driveway with her hands wringing the strap of her purse because she had not liked what she heard. Dana stood in front of 90 homeowners with the clubhouse projector behind her, and she called my ranch a blight. She called me a holdout who was dragging down everyone's property values and refusing to be a good neighbor. She said the board was pursuing every legal avenue to bring the parcel into the community where it belonged. She said it was functionally part of the association's jurisdiction, Lottie told me, and that the only thing standing between Cedar Ridge and the future was one stubborn old man. Lottie looked embarrassed to be repeating it. I told her that wasn't right, Ray. A couple of us did, but she's got most of them convinced. You're the problem. I thanked her, and I asked her to write down the date for me, the date of the meeting and roughly what was said, and to sign it. She did, right there on the hood of my truck. Functionally part of our jurisdiction, said a second time, now in front of 90 witnesses. Incident 16. Then in October, she made the call that turned a property dispute into something else. It was a Saturday morning, just after 7. The light still gray and cold over the canyon. I was in the barn, forking hay. Cole was still asleep. I heard tires on gravel, more than one set, and I came out to find 2 sheriff's cruisers parked in my own driveway and 2 deputies walking toward my gate with their hands resting easy on their belts. Dana Pruitt was behind them in a blazer, the color of a road cone, arms crossed over her clipboard, and she had a look on her face I will not forget. It was the look of a person who believes the machinery of the state has finally arrived to do exactly what she tells it to. The lead deputy was a young man named Eric Sala. He was professional, and he was visibly uncomfortable, the way a decent person is uncomfortable when he suspects he has been pointed at the wrong target. Mr. Poss. Holloway, he said. We received a complaint of trespassing and unpermitted commercial activity on association common ground. I'm obligated to respond to it. I told him I understood, and I did. I had stood near enough deputies across 30 years of boundary disputes to know that a filed complaint is a thing they cannot simply wave away no matter how thin it looks. I told him every fence on the property was on a survey. I had recorded with the county that the cattle were on my own deeded land, that the water right was older than the state, and that the woman behind him had no jurisdiction over a single square inch of it. I kept my voice level. I did not point. I did not raise it. Cumbar. Deputy Salas looked at me, and looked at the fence, and looked out at the meadow, where the cattle were just shapes in the gray light, and I watched him do the arithmetic that a constrained officer has to do in real time. Sir, he said quietly, almost under Dana's hearing, I have to act on a filed complaint, regardless of the merits. That's the job. But if what you're telling me is documented, the way this ends isn't an argument at the gate. It's paper in front of a magistrate. Build the record. Keep your dates. The day you can put a verified document on a judge's bench that settles this boundary, all of this stops cold. He handed me his card. He told me the threshold he needed was a pattern, documented incidents with dates and times, and one clean instrument that put the boundary beyond dispute. He told me to keep my cameras running. Then he turned and asked Dana Pruitt to step back off my driveway, that this was private property, and she had no standing to be on it. And the way her face changed, the way the road cone confidence flickered when an officer told her no instead of telling me no, was the first real crack I saw in the whole performance. She was not used to the machinery answering to someone else. That morning, standing in my driveway, with 2 cruisers idling, and my son now awake and watching from the porch in his sock feet, his face white, I made a decision. I had been holding the remnant parcel in reserve as a curiosity, a thing I knew about and might use someday. Now I understood exactly what it was. It was the ground the sheriff's substation parking lot sat on. It was the gravel those 2 cruisers had driven across to reach the road to my gate. It was the access the entire Cedar Ridge subdivision used to get in and out, 90 homes and 200 more on the drawing board, every one of them dependent on a road that crossed a 2-acre sliver belonging to no one. So I bought it. Pete Vance had the chain of title clean by the 2nd week of October. Pete had trained under me 20 years before, and now ran his own private boundary practice, and he was exactly the man for this, because his name was not Holloway, and nobody up on the bench knew he and I had ever worked together. I asked him to pull the chain of title on a certain remnant parcel up by the county road, and to do it the way I taught him, every link confirmed, nothing assumed. I did not tell him why at first. I just wanted it clean, done by someone whose name was not mine, recorded properly, witnessed. He called me back 4 days later, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "Ray," he said, "this thing's an orphan. 2 acres, runs right along the road, and as far as I can follow it, nobody's held title since the 40s. No dedication to the county, no deed to the developer, taxes delinquent back, further than the records go clean." There was a pause. "You know, this is the ground the substation parks on, and the road into Cedar Ridge runs across the corner of it." I told him I knew. He laughed once quietly. The laugh of a surveyor who has just seen a beautiful clean line close. "Lord," he said, "what do you want to do with it?" I told him I wanted to buy it, properly and lawfully. And I wanted every step of it recorded so that no one could ever say it was done in the dark. The parcel was just under 2 acres, an irregular sliver running along the county road. I filed an application to purchase it through the county's established process for acquiring unowned remnant ground, the same ordinance I had once recommended the county use to clean it up. I paid the back taxes that nobody had paid in 60 years, which came to $4,100. The application went through the assessor, the treasurer, and a 30-day notice period during which any prior claimant could come forward. And nobody did, because there was no prior claimant. On a Thursday in November, the deed was recorded in my name. Ray Holloway, owner of record of the 2-acre strip that the sheriff's substation used for its parking lot, and that carried the only legal road access Cedar Ridge had. I did not tell anyone. I did not change a thing on the ground. The cruisers kept parking on my gravel, and the homeowners kept driving across my corner, and not one of them knew that the ownership under their tires had quietly changed hands. I filed a deed. I put a clean copy in Carol's folder, the year folder, behind the 16 incidents. and I waited for the right room. The right room came in January. The association, through its attorney, filed a civil action against me in county court to force removal of the cattle and to collect the accumulated fines, which, on paper, had reached $11,000. The hearing was set in the county courthouse, the same building where I had worked for 31 years, in a small wood-paneled courtroom on the second floor, in front of a magistrate named Judge Alderman, who I had testified before, more times than I could count on boundary and easement matters. Dana Pruitt arrived in a new blazer, navy this time, with her attorney on one side and her husband Marcus on the other, and a banker's box full of HOA documents, meeting minutes, fine ledgers, and printed photographs. I arrived with one manila folder under my arm and Cole beside me in his good shirt, because he had asked to come and I thought he had earned the right to see it. I want to slow down here because this was the moment everything had been climbing toward, and it did not happen the way she expected. The association's attorney spoke first, and he spoke well. The way a man speaks when he believes he holds the stronger hand. He laid out the fines in order. He walked the judge through the inspections, the meeting minutes, the complaint to the sheriff. He described my ranch as a non-conforming use, degrading a planned residential community and me as an owner who had ignored months of good faith notices. He used the word jurisdiction twice, and each time Dana Pruitt nodded along in the front row, certain, composed, the clipboard president in her element. When he finished, Judge Alderman turned to me over the top of his glasses and asked if I had a response. I stood up. I did not give a speech. I have watched good men lose winnable cases by talking too long and handing the other side something to argue with. I said only that I had 3 documents I wished to enter into the record, and I asked the clerk to hand them up to the bench. The first was my recorded deed to the ranch, carrying the water right that predated statehood, and the boundary survey I had signed and recorded in 1990. The second was the recorded survey of the access road, the one I had drawn in 1996, showing in hard lines exactly where the Cedar Ridge subdivision's only legal access ran, and across whose ground. The third was a deed recorded the previous November to a 2-acre remnant parcel along that road in the name of Ray Holloway. Judge Alderman read the first 2 without much change in his face. Then he read the third and he stopped, and he read it again. He looked up over his glasses, not at me, but at the association's attorney. "Counsel," he said, "are you aware that the access road and parking area serving your client's subdivision and the sheriff's substation cross a parcel that this man now owns?" The attorney did not answer right away. He leaned over and whispered with Marcus Pruitt, and I watched the developer's face go from confusion to understanding to something close to gray. The room was very quiet. Somewhere a chair creaked. Dana Pruitt was still looking at me with that cone-colored confidence, because she did not yet understand what had just landed on the bench. I did not say anything. That was the hardest part and the most important part. I just stood there, and I let the paper do what paper does. The judge set his glasses down. "Let me make sure I understand the position," he said. "Cedar Ridge has been assessing fines against Mr. Gann Holloway and sending deputies to his gate over cattle on land he holds by a deed older than the state, and the road every one of those homeowners uses to reach their homes, and the lot those cruisers parked in runs across 2 acres. Holloway purchased lawfully and recorded in November. Is that the situation?" The attorney said it appeared that further review was warranted. Judge Alderman almost smiled. He dismissed the association's action in full. He found that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my parcel, that the fines were void and uncollectible, and that the inspections and the complaint to the sheriff constituted a documented pattern of harassment against a property owner. He entered all 16 of my filed incidents into the record. 16 incidents, $11,000 in fines assessed, $0 collected, against one deed recorded 100 years before Dana Pruitt was born, and one parcel she never knew existed. Then he said the thing that ended it. He noted, for the record, that as the lawful owner of the access parcel, I was within my rights to control its use, and he suggested the parties reach an accommodation quickly because the alternative was a subdivision with no legal road. I never had to make a threat. I never had to gloat. The consequence fell exactly where the overreach had come from. The way water finds the low ground. Marcus Pruitt's Phase 2 development died at the County Planning Commission within the month because a residential subdivision cannot be approved without secured legal access, and the legal access ran across my gravel nail, and I was under no obligation to grant it to a man who had spent a year trying to take my wife's meadow. The renderings of the alpine pasture with no cattle in it were quietly withdrawn from the marketing office. The lots that had been pre-sold off those renderings had to be refunded. Dana Pruitt resigned as association president before the spring. It was not the lawsuit alone that did it. It was that the homeowners learned, when the dust settled, that their board had spent association dues on a legal action that not only failed in open court, but ended with their only road in their sheriff's parking lot, in the hands of the very man they had been told was the enemy. A few of them came down off the bench to my gate in those weeks, hats in their hands, to say they had not known that they had believed her. I told them I knew they hadn't. Most people believe the person with the letterhead. That is exactly why the letterhead is dangerous, and exactly why the deed is the only thing that ever really answers it. I granted the easement in the end. I am not a cruel man, and the families up on the bench had done nothing worse than trust a woman with a clipboard and a confident voice. I signed a permanent access easement for the homeowners and a separate fair lease to the county for the substation parking, both recorded, both reasonable, both on terms I set rather than terms set for me. I did not raise anyone's road costs or block anyone's path home. I just made certain that the ground everyone had assumed was theirs, by default, was finally understood, on paper and forever, to be mine by right and used by them at my goodwill. The cattle never moved. They are in the meadow right now, in the exact viewshed Dana Pruitt swore she would clear by a Friday that came and went 2 years ago. The evening after the hearing, I came home and Cole was waiting on the porch in the cold, his jacket on, because he had heard from a friend whose mother was on the board, and he wanted to hear it from me. He wanted to know if it was true, if it was really over. I told him it was. He was quiet for a second, working it over, the way he works everything over. And then he asked me how I knew, all those months ago, that we would be all right, when the cruisers were in the driveway and the letters kept coming, and even he had been scared. I told him the truth. I told him I did not know we would be all right. I told him I knew we were in the right, and that those are two different things, and that the only way to turn the one into the other is to write everything down, keep your dates, hold your temper, and wait for the room where the paper finally gets read. He nodded slowly, taking it in. Then he went inside and made dinner, the way his mother used to on the nights I came home late. And I sat on the porch a while longer, in the cold, and looked at the red trailer Carol painted barn red the summer before she got sick, still standing in the view shed, and I let myself feel for the first time. So here is what I want you to take from this, plainly, because the whole point of telling it is so it is useful to you and not just satisfying to me. If an association, a board, a code office, or any clipboard authority makes a claim against your property, do not argue and do not pay. Document. Keep a dated folder. Photograph every notice. Save every letter. Write down every word they say to your face and the time they said it. Pull your own deed and read it against the ground. Find the boundary survey and confirm it. File a records request for the plat that supposedly includes you and read it for yourself, because 9 times out of 10 you are not in it. Learn what land around you is owned and by whom, because the thing that ends these fights is almost never a louder argument. It is a quieter, older, cleaner piece of paper produced in the one room where paper is the only thing that matters. The camel man who keeps records beats the loud one with a clipboard every single time, and now you know how. If you have ever stared down a clipboard at your own gate, tell me about it in the comments, because I read them. And there is always more to learn from how other people held their ground. If this story was worth your evening, subscribe, because I have more of them. I am not done telling them. Next time, I will tell you about the widow Two Valleys over whose HOA tried to condemn her late husband's airstrip as an unpermitted structure, not knowing it was registered with the federal government and that the man who registered it had left her one last instruction in a sealed envelope. That one took 3 years and a federal inspector to finish. I will see you then.